Hello, this is Jason Dean again from Fanatic. Happy YouTube. Happy day. Hope everyone's doing good. This is a continuation of the series of where I'm going to do all of the Friday the 13th movies. I had this idea about probably about a week ago or so. So initially I was going to do just a show on the franchise as a whole and kind of its impact on my life and the background and how it's related to me personally, and I've always found it it's been part of my upbringing and my youth, and even to this day, how it's influenced me particularly artistically, if you want to call it that, through my music that I write for Quantum. And initially it was just going to be a show for just like a general kind of overview of the entire franchise. But then I moved it into a thing of like, what the heck? Why not do all of the movies? Because I love all of them, and there's standout movies like I've said before. But I figured why not just pursue it and go all the way, and because I'm trying to get more and more experience with doing this whole new thing with YouTube. So, and I love all the movies. They all they all kind of mean the world to me. So I figured, why the heck not? And what can, like I mentioned before, what could I add to the conversation when it comes to this great and awesome franchise? Because this has been all of these movies have been discussed for for like 30 years, 20 years, 10 years. I mean, you name it. They've been debated, they've been discussed and reviewed countless amounts of times. So I figured, and so I had doubts like initially about what could I contribute to it, but I figured, what the heck? It's part of me, and I'll just do it. So here we go. So this is a review for part three, and this is the first one. The other thing, well, two big things I feel that as a franchise as a whole, as the movie and the characters, all of these things, the way they kind of contributed to cinema, I really feel that without the Friday the 13th movies, in particular the first one, horror movies and the world of horror exploitation, which I really, really love and is my favorite genre, they it wouldn't be the same. I think in some ways it probably would have still come about to a degree, but I feel like as a whole, the whole franchise has changed everything, or did change everything, and went on to influence thousands and thousands of movies that came out during that time and after. And I feel like it changed the face of horror cinema forever. And without these movies, I feel it would have been significantly different. There probably wouldn't have been the amount of movies that say came out in the 80s, particularly around the whole like slasher horror exploitation craze, where literally there was like thousands of movies that came out, all trying to capitalize on the success of the first one. You know, sticking with the theme of the world of exploitation. And many of those movies went on to become very, very successful, and some went into like total obscurity. And that's been the focus on, and with this channel and my Facebook page and Instagram page for Film Fanatic, has been, the focus has been trying to bring some light to some films. If you like these movies, maybe movies that were uh, you know had their little bit of success but then disappeared, or didn't have any success and they just kind of went into obscurity. But being that we live in this amazing age of Blu-ray and DVDs, you have all and the all of these companies that have come out and reissued all of these like amazing classics, movies that were forgotten initially. With companies like Severin, the Blue Underground, countless, countless numbers of companies that have come back and have re-released all of these movies and have given them such like royal treatment. It's kind of unprecedented. Movies that were gone forever. So that's been the focus, is like with the pages and the stuff that I talk about, is to try to maybe give light to those films that weren't really seen and have been more or less forgotten. And this movie and this franchise played a gigantic pivotal role in all of these other movies that were ripoffs of it, or that were you know that were trying to capitalize and exploit that audience, or that niche, or that niche that was in the public at the time. I mean, even if you trace back Friday the 13th, the original, that into itself was an exploitation movie. And that was essentially a knockoff of the original Halloween by John Carpenter. That movie came out before, and and that was a phenomenon. And that was the first, one of the first independent horror films that had, well, it arguably is probably the first horror film, indie horror film, that had major success. Like, it was a genuine blockbuster. And the creators of this franchise basically ripped that movie off and created something new. Well, not something new, but something based on that formula of the classic slasher, the classic indie independent slasher horror film formula. So this is a show for part three. Part three, and like I was starting to say, one of the two biggest things that I feel as an entire franchise that this initial first movie evolved to, or led to, was, it was during the 80s, came out in 1980, the first one, and it gave birth to one of the first times ever that there was a movie franchise. And so it was unprecedented. And now, like I've said before, it's commonplace for there to be franchises. Case in point, I'm a huge fan of the Marvel movies. And I like some of the DC movies, but I'm more of a Marvel person personally. And that's one big continuous, to a point, never ending franchise. And there's, dozens of others. Like mentioned other films, the Purge films, Born Identity films, Harry Potter. The list is endless. Where there's been just numerous franchises, and so this, in one regard, I feel, as a franchise and as a movie as a whole, it did something that was kind of unprecedented, and did something that really wasn't a thing, 40 years or so before now, where franchises are commonplace, and it's a almost almost an expected thing, because I it's become like a thing now. I know, like, for instance, I was talking about Marvel, and it's become commonplace to, like, each movie that comes out that's a part of that universe, is that you wait to the end of the film, and then there's some kind of information about the next movie and where this world will go for the next movie. And that's been kind of like the accepted norm now for when you see these movies. So, yeah, so it was ahead of its time by many years. And then also, the other thing about this movie, particularly part 3, which I'm covering now, is this was one of the first, like, big movies, big giant blockbuster horror films that was shot in 3D. In 3D, within the last few years, I don't really see it as much, but I know when Avatar, James Cameron's movie, Avatar came out a few years back, there was that was a major titan in the box office, and that was released on 3D. And then around that time period, there was a bazillion movies that all came out in that format, or that was as far as if you were paying a ticket to go see a film, that was an option, was to be able to go and see a movie in 3D. And there's also, if you don't have like the funky glasses, like on this DVD that I have of part three, if you don't have the funky glasses, you have the choice of 2D or 3D. So, but you still kind of get the gist of it, and you still get that visual element. It's not quite as intense. I remember seeing the last movie I saw in 3D was a Thor movie, and I think it might have been the third, the second Thor movie, which the name of it escapes me. But I remember seeing that in 3D, and it was super intense. But I haven't really heard of too many movies lately within the last few years that have come out in 3D. But when Avatar came out, it was huge again, and virtually every movie that was coming out, especially like a Hollywood blockbuster, action Marvel movie kind of thing, or there was always that option. They were releasing them all in 3D. IMAX has become probably a bigger thing now, where now every movie that comes out has, to a degree, an IMAX option, which I actually prefer. I prefer the big scope of IMAX mostly to anything else. But this movie, again, part three, came out in 1982, and at this point, this was the Friday 13th was a full on franchise, because they started cranking these movies out. I mean, this is all within 2 years. They've already cranked out the third movie of the initial release of the first one. So, and and at that point, this movie, which was also directed by Steve Miner, who directed part two, this movie went on to become, well, I believe in the collection of all of the initial movies, um, part three was the most successful commercially. It was a huge blockbuster. Um, oh, no, actually, I take that back. Sorry, part four, the final chapter was the most successful one in the entire franchise. But this movie, the final chapter, like I was saying, that was the biggest, which is the next movie I'll be getting to. That was the most successful in the entire franchise, with the exception of the last one that came out, which I've mentioned about 10 years ago. That was the most successful one. And before that, it was Freddy vs. Jason, which was the biggest one. But when part three came out, again, it was ahead of its time because it was shot in 3D, so you had this option to see it in 3D, and it was all shot, before they had the technology. So there's a lot of great interviews and special features on this disc for part three, where they talk a lot about, they were inventing this new thing at the time. So technically, it was the most challenging of the most challenging film to shoot in the entire series, because of the ramifications of getting everything in 3D. So that meant that they had to get everything in camera, and the placement of all of the technology in the cameras that they had at that time, which was like kind of nothing compared to now. They had to get everything in camera, and there was like, in the special features, they talk about how there was like numerous scenes where they had to do about 40 or 50 times, where to get it right, because of if the space was off with the actual shot or the shoot, it would not render itself to be something that they could use for the 3D. So they had to constantly redo all of these takes. And so it was, from a technical standpoint, they spent, an ungodly amount of time shooting the film. And it really, uh, up until this point, I feel like the third one is the more campier side. It's a little bit more silly and goofy and kind of terrible as far as the acting and the dialogue. It's definitely a little bit more silly. But on the other side of things, I love it, but it's also the first introduction of the iconic hockey mask for Jason Voorhees. And this movie starred Dana Krimble, Richard Broker, who plays Jason, Paul Kratka, Rachel Howard, and Jeffrey Rogers, and Catherine Parks. And each movie pretty much always had a different cast throughout this entire series. And, of course, with Jason, the iconic killer in the movie. the only the only actor to have played Jason a handful of times is Kane Hodder. He's in the later half of the series or of the franchise. But in this, Richard Broker plays Jason Voorhees, and I think he does a pretty excellent job. It's he's pretty intense, pretty menacing. There's some great kills, and you could tell. I also feel so far in me in my experience rewatching all of these films back to back, this film seems a little bit more dated than the other ones to a degree, particularly around the effects, the 3D aspect. You can actually see it's pretty hilarious because you can actually see the wires in some of the shots. Like there's a couple of scenes where someone's eyeball gets pulled or pops out of a person's head, and you can literally see like the metal wire pulling the eyeball, and it's like horrible and so cheesy, but it kind of adds to the charm. It makes it just so ridiculous. But you really see how dated and how technically it must have been just the biggest pain in the ass for them to make this movie. And they talk a lot about that in the film, how this was like the hardest from a technical standpoint, and everything kind of became secondary. They were so obsessed with trying to get the shots right that the characterization, the acting, the script, everything became took a back seat, and you can kind of see that in the movie. But it's still great, and that's one of the things is it's a pivotal movie in a way to the franchise, because it's when Jason Voorhees first dons the hockey mask, which he's most well known for, and it's great. I mean, there's some great kills. It's like I said, it's probably the most dated out of the movies I've seen again so far, and having the experience of watching them together. Even though I've seen these movies countless times, it's an interesting experience watching them back to back, in one sitting, because you can really see, I get a different impression from the films watching it now, and also in that format. Particularly around the second one, that was I found myself enjoying that even more. So, yeah, I really recommend, if you get a chance to pick up the box set. It's pretty awesome. I got it a couple of years ago, and it's packed with all kinds of great special features. So, yeah, this is Jason Dean. Check out my YouTube channel. Like and subscribe if you get a chance. And we will see you next time for part 4, the final chapter. Peace.